The sound of weights slamming together echoed through the large warehouse-like building, mixing with the heavy thuds of bodies hitting the thick blue mats. It was a Tuesday evening, which meant the gym was packed. The air smelled of sweat, rubber, and the faint scent of cheap disinfectant spray. This place wasn't a fancy fitness center where people came to jog on treadmills, while watching TV. It was a hardcore fight gym, a place where people went to learn how to grapple, wrestle, and defend themselves. The man in charge, a massive figure with a shaved head and a goatee, walked through the rows of students. We will call him Coach. He stopped to watch two larger men wrestling each other, shouting instructions over the noise. He loved the aggression. He loved the loud grunts and the clatter. To him, fighting was about being tough, being loud, and being strong. He didn't have much patience for anyone who didn't fit that mold. While the coach was busy yelling at a pair of beginners for not going hard enough, the front door of the gym opened. The bell above the door chimed, but nobody really noticed over the noise of the music blasting from the speakers. A woman stepped inside. She wasn't very tall, and she didn't look like she spent her days pumping iron. She was slim, with her hair pulled back into a tight, neat bun. She carried a gym bag over one shoulder. She walked to the front desk where the receptionist was typing on a computer. The music was so loud that she had to lean in to speak. She asked about the membership and if she could join in for the advanced grappling class that was starting in 10 minutes. The receptionist looked up, surprised. Usually, people who came for the advanced class looked like they could break a wall down. This woman looked like she might be a librarian or an office worker. Just as the receptionist was about to answer, the coach walked by. He stopped when he saw the new face. He looked her up and down, his eyes narrowing. He didn't say hello. He didn't smile. He crossed his thick arms over his chest and stared. "You here for the cardio kickboxing class?" the coach asked, his voice loud and gruff. "That's in the other room, down the hall." The woman shook her head gently. She didn't seem intimidated by his size or his tone. "No," she said softly. "I'm here for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The advanced session." The coach let out a short, loud laugh, like a bark. He looked over at his students, some of whom were now pausing to watch the interaction. He found the idea hilarious. "Advanced?" he repeated. "Listen, lady, this isn't a game. The guys in there are animals. They weigh over 200 pounds. They are strong. You look like you might blow away if the AC is turned up too high." He wasn't trying to be mean in a cruel way, at least not in his own mind. He thought he was doing her a favor. In his world, protecting someone meant telling them they weren't good enough. He saw a small, quiet woman and assumed she was weak. He couldn't see past the surface. "I think I will be okay," the woman said. Her voice was calm. She didn't get angry. She didn't argue. She just stood there, looking at him with dark, focused eyes. "I have my belt in my bag." The coach raised an eyebrow. "You have a belt? What? A white belt?" In Jiu-Jitsu, the white belt is the first level, the rank of a beginner. He assumed she had taken a few classes at a YMCA and thought she was a fighter. "I don't wear a white belt," she replied simply. The coach shook his head. He didn't have time for this. The class was starting. He pointed a thick finger toward the changing rooms. "Fine, go get changed. But don't say I didn't warn you. If you get in there and get hurt, don't come crying to me. We don't slow down for anybody. If you can't keep up, I'll pull you out. I don't want you wasting my students' time." He turned his back on her and walked onto the mat, clapping his hands loudly. "All right, break time is over. Everybody up. Line up." The woman walked to the changing room. The receptionist watched her go, feeling a bit nervous for her. Everyone knew how the coach was. He had no filter. If he thought you were weak, he made sure everyone knew it. He would often make new people quit on their first day just by pushing them too hard. Inside the women's locker room, it was quiet compared to the noise outside. The woman opened her bag. She took out her GFI, traditional uniform worn in Jiu-Jitsu. It was stark white, stiff with starch, and tied tightly with a belt. As she wrapped the belt around her waist and tied the knot, she moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm. She didn't rush. She tied the knot in a specific way, a way that showed she had done it thousands of times before. Meanwhile, out on the mats, The coach was pacing back and forth. He was talking to one of his top students, a big guy who had won a few local tournaments. The coach was still annoyed by the new woman. He thought it was disrespectful to the art for someone to just walk in off the street and think they could jump into the deep end. Some people, the coach muttered, shaking his head, they watch a few YouTube videos and think they are ninja warriors. It's a joke. She's going to get smashed in 5 minutes. The student laughed. Maybe she's just looking for a boyfriend, coach? Maybe, the coach grunted. Well, she won't find one when she's got a bloody nose. The back door to the gym opened. The woman stepped out onto the mats. She was barefoot. Her GI fit her perfectly, not too loose and not too tight. She walked to the edge of the mat where the other students were lining up. She found a spot near the back, bowed respectfully to the center of the training area tradition in martial arts, and then stood in line with her hands behind her back. The coach looked down the line of students. He saw her standing there, looking quiet and small. He decided right then that he was going to make an example of her. He was going to show the class that being quiet meant you were weak. He was going to push her until she quit, just to prove a point. Today we are working on takedowns and guard passing, the coach announced, his voice booming. I want you to find a partner. Someone your size? The students began to shuffle around. The woman in the back looked around. There were mostly men in the class. A few of the guys looked at her, but nobody wanted to partner with her. They were afraid of hurting her, or they were afraid the coach would yell at them for going easy. She stood alone for a moment. Finally, a young man, probably a college student trying to bulk up, stepped toward her. He looked nervous. He didn't want to be the one to break the new girl. I guess I'll work with you, the young man said awkwardly. The coach saw this. He didn't like it. No, 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 he shouted, walking over to them. That's not fair. You were too big for her. The young man looked relieved, thinking he was off the hook. But the coach turned and looked around. He spotted another student, a huge guy, who looked like he played football. You, the coach pointed. Come here, the football player walked over. Partner up with her, the coach said. Don't go easy. Treat her like you would anyone else. She needs to learn what this is about. The football player looked at the small woman, then at the coach. Coach, I don't want to hurt her. She said she wanted advanced, the coach snapped, looking right at the woman with a smirk on his face. This is advanced. Let's see if she can handle it. The woman didn't blink. She simply nodded at the football player and stepped onto the mat to begin the drill. The coach stood there with his arms crossed, watching closely. He was waiting for her to fail. He was waiting for her to look scared, or for her to complain, or for her to run off the mat, crying. He had no idea that he had just made the biggest mistake of his coaching career. He saw a quiet, small woman who looked out of place. He didn't see the years of discipline, the hours of grinding practice, or the medals that were hidden away at home. He judged her by her cover. And he was about to read a book he didn't understand. The room fell into a rhythm as the pairs began practicing. The coach kept his eyes glued to the back corner, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He thought he knew exactly how this story was going to end. But as the saying goes, you should never judge a book by its cover. And you should never underestimate a quiet person who knows exactly who they are. The class moved into the warm-up drills, and the coach stood with his arms crossed. Leaning against the wall near the heavy bags, his eyes were locked on the back corner of the room where the new woman had set up her mat space. She stood facing the massive football player, a guy who easily outweighed her by 100 pounds of pure muscle. To the coach, this wasn't a fair match. It was a car accident waiting to happen. But he didn't intervene. In his mind, this was a necessary lesson. He wanted the quiet woman to realize that this gym was not a place for people who couldn't handle the pressure. All right, pummeling drills. The coach barked, clapping his hands to restart the rhythm of the class. Snap the head down. Control the position. Don't just grab and hold. Move. The room filled with the sound of slapping skin and the squeak of bare feet on the canvas. The coach watched as the big guy tentatively reached for the woman's shoulders. He was clearly holding back, his movements stiff and careful. He looked like a giant afraid of crushing a kitten. The coach stomped across the mat, his face twisting into a scowl. He didn't like hesitation. He didn't like careful. He wanted chaos and power. I said advanced. He yelled, stopping right next to the pair. The big guy flinched and looked up. The coach pointed a thick finger at him. Stop treating her like glass. She asked for this class. You move like an old man. Put some pressure on her. Then he turned his glare to the woman. And you. Stop waiting. You need to move, or you're going to get steamrolled. This isn't a dance floor. Use your hips. The woman didn't say a word. She just looked at the coach, her expression calm, and gave a small, respectful nod. But the coach noticed something strange in her eyes. There was no fear there. Usually when he yelled at new people, especially new people in the advanced class, they would get flustered. Their hands would shake, or they would look down at their feet. This woman just looked at him. It felt like she was looking right through him, measuring him. The coach shook off the weird feeling and walked away, leaving them to their drill. He moved to the center of the room to correct another student's posture, but his mind kept drifting back to the corner. For the next 10 minutes, they drilled techniques how to control an opponent's arms, how to block a takedown. Every time the coach looked over, he expected to see the woman struggling. He expected to see the big man knocking her off balance or muscling her around. But that isn't what he saw. It was subtle. You had to be looking closely to see it. While the big guy was using all his strength, pushing and shoving with his heavy arms, the woman was barely moving. She wasn't fighting his force with force. When he pushed, she would just step slightly to the side. When he tried to grab her, she would angle her body so his hands would slip right off her shoulders. It was annoying to watch. The coach prided himself on toughness, on grit, on fighting through pain. This woman looked like she was floating. It made him angry. He didn't respect fluidity. He respected power. He saw her lack of effort not as skill, but as laziness or weakness. Finally, the coach called a halt to the drills. He blew his whistle, and the sound cut through the humid air. All right, that's enough warming up, he announced. Time to spar. Live rolling. 5-minute rounds. Reset in the middle if you go out of bounds. Let's go. The class paired up. This was the part where the real fighting happened. It was unscripted. People got tired, people got bruised, and egos got tested. The coach watched the corners as people found partners. Again, the woman was left alone for a brief moment. The big guy from the warm-up hesitated, looking at the coach for permission. He didn't want to hurt her. The coach rolled his eyes. He was tired of the coddling. He decided he was going to step in himself. He was going to show this woman exactly what advance meant. He was going to smash her, not out of cruelty, but to teach her a lesson she wouldn't forget. He wanted her to go home and realize she wasn't cut out for this world. It was an ego thing, pure and simple. He couldn't stand the idea that someone so quiet thought they belonged on his mats. Before the coach could make his move, a younger student, a wiry kid with a lot of energy but very little control, ran over to the woman. I'll go with her, the kid said, bouncing on the balls of his feet. He was eager to prove himself. The coach stopped. He looked at the kid, then at the woman. Fine, he grunted. Let's see how she handles a spaz. A spaz was gym slang for someone who moved wildly without control. They slapped hands to start the round. The coach stood right next to them, watching like a hawk. As soon as the slap ended, the kid launched himself at the woman. He wasn't trying to be mean. He was just fast and frantic. He grabbed for her collar, trying to yank her down to the ground. Throwing his whole body weight into the motion, the coach winced, waiting for her to be dragged down or pushed over, but she didn't move an inch. When the kid pulled, the woman seemed to root herself into the floor. It was physics that the coach couldn't understand from his angle. The harder the kid pulled, the lower she seemed to get, her posture perfect, her back straight. The kid stumbled forward, off balance, expecting to meet resistance and finding none. He almost fell on his face. They began to wrestle for grips. The kid was frantic, switching his hands every second, trying to confuse her. The woman, in contrast, was incredibly still. She didn't flap her arms. She moved with a scary kind of precision. She would grab the kid's sleeve, twist her wrist a certain way, and suddenly the kid would lose his balance. She was controlling him with 2 fingers while he was flailing with both arms. The coach frowned. He couldn't figure out what he was seeing. It looked fake. It looked like the kid was letting her win, maybe because she was a girl. But the coach saw the look on the kid's face. He wasn't letting her win. He was confused. He was trying as hard as he could, but nothing was working. The coach yelled at the kid, trying to help. "Get your head up. Don't let her control you." The kid tried to listen. He straightened his back and tried to use his long legs to wrap around the woman, a move called guard pulling. He managed to get his legs around her waist, locking his ankles together. He squeezed tight, thinking he had her trapped. From this position, a person with strong legs could make it very hard to breathe or move. The coach shook his head. "She's done now," he muttered to himself. "Once someone is in your guard, it's hard to get out unless you really know what you're doing." He watched closely, waiting for the woman to panic and try to rip the legs off, which would only tire her out. Instead, she placed one hand on the kid's hip and the other on his knee. She didn't pull or push hard. She just leaned her weight forward. Then the unexpected happened. In a blur of motion, the woman stood up. The kid was still holding onto her waist with his legs, but she just stood straight up, lifting him off the ground. It was a display of core strength that shocked the coach. She didn't grunt or strain. She just picked the kid up. The kid panicked, realizing he was dangling in the air. He let go and scrambled backward on the mat. The woman didn't chase him. She didn't try to jump on top and punch him. She just stood there waiting for him to come back. She looked bored. The coach felt a chill run down his neck. He looked around the room. A few other students had stopped what they were doing to watch the match. They sensed something too. The air in the gym had changed. The whispers and joking had stopped. It was quiet, except for the squeak of the kid's bare feet as he tried to find a way to attack her. "Keep going," the coach shouted, his voice a little less confident than before. "Don't stop. She's open." The kid launched himself at her again, trying to tackle her legs. As he shot in, the woman stepped sideways. It was a tiny step, barely an inch. The kid missed her legs completely and flew past her. As he passed, she gently put a hand on his back and guided him down to the mat. It wasn't a violent slam. It was like she was helping a child cross the street. She took his back in a second. The coach held his breath. This was a bad position to be in. The kid was trapped. He tried to buck her off, arching his back and kicking his legs. The woman rode him like a surfboard on a wave. She wasn't fighting his energy. She was absorbing it. When he went left, she went left. When he went right, she went right. She wrapped her arm around his neck. The coach saw the kid's face turn red. He tapped the mat instantly. Tap, tap, tap. The signal for, "I give up." She let go immediately and stood up. She reached a hand down to help the kid up. He took it, breathing hard, looking at her with a mix of terror and awe. He couldn't speak. The coach stared at the woman. She wasn't even sweating. Her chest wasn't heaving. She adjusted her belt, looked at the kid, and bowed to him. It was the respect of a master. The coach's mind was racing. Who was this woman? What kind of trick was this? He had trained professional fighters. He knew what strength looked like, and he knew what fear looked like. He saw neither of those things in her. He saw something else, something he couldn't quite name, and it made him very nervous. He clenched his jaw. He couldn't let this stand. He couldn't let some random person walk into his gym and make his students look like fools without even trying. He walked onto the mat, his steps heavy and deliberate. He needed to test her himself. He needed to know if this was real or if the whole world had just gone crazy. The coach stepped onto the mat, his bare feet thudding heavily against the canvas. The usual noise of the gym, the clanging weights, the shuffling feet, a low hum of conversation had faded into a heavy, confused silence. Every student in the advanced class had stopped what they were doing. They were all looking at the woman in the white GI, who was calmly helping the young man to his feet after tapping him out in seconds. The coach felt a prickle of sweat on his forehead, but it wasn't from the heat. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and marched over to where she stood. The young man, still trying to catch his breath, saw the coach coming and quickly scooted backward, putting distance between himself and the coming storm. He looked terrified, mostly because he knew the coach's ego was bruised. "All right, break it up," the coach barked, though the pair had already separated. He turned his sharp gaze onto the woman. "That was interesting, but he's a kid. He doesn't know how to use his size yet." That was sloppy, as the woman didn't react to the insult. She simply stood there, her hands hanging loosely by her sides, her breathing slow and rhythmic. She looked at the coach, waiting for him to continue. "You think you can handle the advanced class?" the coach asked, puffing out his chest. He was a big man, used to towering over people. He wanted her to feel his size, his presence. He wanted her to back down. "You think that little dance routine was real jiu-jitsu?" "This isn't a demo. I am just here to train," she said quietly. Her voice was soft, almost polite, which only made the coach angrier. He didn't want polite. He wanted a fight. He wanted to prove that his gym was the hardest place in the city and that she didn't belong. "Train?" The coach laughed, a short, harsh sound. "You want to train? Fine, I'll train you." He clapped his hands together, loud and sharp, making a few of the newer students jump. "Clear a circle. Everybody back up. Make some space." The students scrambled to the edges of the mats, forming a wide circle around the coach and the woman. They exchanged nervous glances. Nobody wanted to see this. They knew the coach had a temper, and they knew he could be rough. They also suspected that the woman wasn't what she seemed, but they were afraid to admit it. It felt like watching a lamb walk into a lion's den. Except the lamb looked strangely unconcerned. The coach took off his coaching shirt, revealing a tight rash guard underneath that showed off the muscles of his torso and arms. He was covered in old bruises and scars, trophies from years of fighting. He pointed a finger at the woman. "No rules on the feet. We wrestle for the takedown. If you get taken down, you sweep or submit. If I take you down, I tap you out. If you can last 2 minutes with me, maybe I'll let you stay." The woman nodded once. She didn't say anything about the time limit. She didn't argue about the terms. She just took a deep breath, centered her weight, and raised her hands in a guard position. She looked loose. Her shoulders were relaxed. To the untrained eye, she looked ready to be knocked over. To anyone who knew movement, she looked like a coiled spring. The coach shouted. He didn't wait for her to be ready. He lunged forward immediately, reaching out with both arms to grab her around the waist. He wanted to use his weight, his size. He wanted to pick her up and slam her onto the mat, to show the class that physics was physics and a small person cannot stop a moving train. As he rushed in, the room seemed to hold its breath. But then, the woman disappeared. Well, not exactly disappeared. She moved at the exact moment the coach thought he had her. She stepped back. It was a tiny step, just out of his reach. But she didn't just step back. She also stepped to the side, spinning her body. Her hands came up and pressed against his shoulder and hip as he flew past her. It was like trying to grab a wet bar of soap. The coach stumbled forward, his momentum carrying him toward the edge of the circle. He caught his balance and turned around, his face turning a shade darker red. "Lucky," he muttered to himself, though the students closest to him heard it. "She's just running." He reset and came forward again, slower this time. He was cautious now. He reached out with his arms, trying to grab hold of her collar or sleeve. The woman let him grab her sleeve. She didn't pull away. "Got you," the coach thought. He yanked hard, trying to pull her off balance and wrap his arms around her legs for a double-leg takedown as he pulled. The woman moved with the force. Instead of fighting the pull, she stepped in close to him, right inside his guard. It was a dangerous place to be. Before he could wrap his arms around her, she ducked under his arm. She was so low that she was almost squatting on the floor. Then, using a technique that looked impossible, she grabbed the back of his belt and his thigh. She stood up explosively, using her legs to drive forward while pulling him backward. It happened in a blur. The coach, who weighed over 220 pounds, felt his feet leave the ground. The world spun upside down. He hit the mat with a massive thud that shook the floor. The impact knocked the wind out of him. He lay there for a second, stunned, staring up at the fluorescent lights. A collective gasp went through the room. One of the students dropped his water bottle before the coach could even think about scrambling up or protecting his face. The woman was already moving. She wasn't trying to hit him. She was flowing like water. She stepped over his head, her hips sliding into place. She controlled his arms with a grip that felt like iron. The coach panicked. His ego was screaming. His brain was in shock. Get her off, he told himself. He bench pressed with his arms, trying to push her away. He bridged his hips up violently, trying to buck her off. He used every ounce of explosive strength he had. It didn't matter. When he pushed up, she pushed his arms to the side. When he bucked, she posted her hand on the mat and rode the wave, settling her weight back down on his chest, heavier than before. It felt like she was made of lead. She began to climb up his body. She trapped one of his arms with her leg, then the other. She was isolating his limbs, taking away his ability to fight back, piece by piece. She was calm, methodical. She wasn't breathing hard. She wasn't grunting. She was just solving a puzzle. And the coach was the puzzle. The coach looked to his left and right for help. But he saw only the shocked faces of his students. They were watching their boss get dismantled by a quiet woman he had mocked 10 minutes ago. He looked back up at her. For the first time, he really looked at her face. She wasn't angry. She wasn't smiling. She was entirely focused. Her eyes were calculating, cold almost. There was no malice, just pure technical mastery.
I don't
understand, the coach wheezed, trying to turn his body to escape. She stopped him with a simple shift of her hip. It felt like a truck was parked on his chest. He realized then that he wasn't fighting a woman. He was fighting a force of nature. All the trash talking, all the muscle, all the aggression, it meant nothing. He was completely outmatc. She reached for his neck. The coach knew what was coming. It was a rear naked choke, the finisher of all finishers. But he didn't want to tap. Not in front of his students, not to her. He grabbed her wrists and tried to peel her hands away. He squeezed his eyes shut and held his breath, determined not to give up. But the pressure came on fast. It wasn't painful, not at first. It was just tight, like a python squeezing the air out of a balloon. The room started to spin. The lights above him began to dim. He felt his arms getting heavy, his grip slipping. He couldn't hold it. His body wouldn't let him. Just as the blackness was about to take him, he slapped his hand against the mat. 3 times hard. She released him instantly. The coach gasped, sucking in huge gulps of air, his chest heaving. He rolled onto his side, coughing. The woman stood up and walked to the edge of the circle. She fixed her GI, straightened her belt, and stood quietly with her hands behind her back. The gym was dead silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the coach trying to catch his breath on the floor. The sound of a man who had just had his entire reality turned upside down. He looked up at her from the floor, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like the coach. He felt like a student who had failed the most important test of his life. The sound of the coach's heavy gasping was the only noise in the entire gym. It was a rough, rattling sound, like someone trying to breathe through a crushed straw. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a bright, unforgiving light on the scene. The coach lay on his side, one arm draped over his ribs, staring at the blue mat beneath him. His face was burning hot, a mix of exertion and a deep, stinging embarrassment that spread from his neck to the tips of his ears. He couldn't believe what had just happened. In less than a minute, he had been thrown, controlled, and choked. He, the leader of the gym, the man who taught people how to be tough, had been dismantled like a toy by a quiet woman who barely weighed more than one of his legs. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up to a sitting position. He looked around. The circle of students was still there, but they weren't looking at him with the usual admiration or respect. They were looking with wide eyes, their mouths slightly open. They were glancing from the coach to the woman and then back to the coach. The dynamic of the room had shifted. The hierarchy had crumbled in 60 seconds. The woman stood a few feet away, calm as ever. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't looking down on him with a smirk. She was just waiting, her hands clasped behind her back, watching him with those dark, focused eyes. She looked like she could go another 10 rounds if she had to. The coach scrambled to his feet, wiping a trail of sweat from his forehead. His legs felt unsteady, like jelly. He tried to compose himself, to pull his coach persona back on like a suit of armor. He cleared his throat, but the sound came out weak and thin. "All right," he rasped, his voice cracking. He tried to cough to clear it. "All right, good." Good scramble. It was a lie, and everyone knew it. It wasn't a scramble. It was a dismantling. But he had to say something to save face. He couldn't just stand there and admit he had been destroyed. He walked over to the woman, his steps heavy. He stopped in front of her. Up close, she didn't look intimidating. She looked normal, ordinary. It made the defeat even harder to swallow. How could someone so normal be so dangerous? "You move differently," the coach said, struggling to find the right words. He wasn't used to giving compliments, especially not to people he had just tried to humiliate. "Your technique is very sharp. Where did you learn to wrestle like that?" The woman adjusted her GI top, pulling the collar straight. She didn't gloat. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just looked at him, her expression neutral. "I've trained for a long time," she said softly. "I have had good teachers." "Teachers?" the coach asked, his curiosity getting the better of his pride. "Who? Anyone I know? Do you train downtown with that MMA team?" She shook her head. "No, I moved here recently. Before I lived in the city, I trained at a small academy out of state." The coach rubbed his jaw. It still hurt from the pressure of the hold she had put him in. "Well, whoever taught you, they did a good job. You're strong for your size." "I didn't expect that. I don't rely on strength," she said simply. "Strength fails. Technique does not." "Ah!" The words hung in the air. The coach felt a sting of irritation, but he knew she was right. He had tried to smash her, to overpower her with brute force, and it had failed completely. She had used leverage and balance, things he preached but rarely practiced himself. "I'm sorry about before," the coach said, the words feeling like sandpaper in his mouth. "I judged you by your size. That was my mistake. It won't happen again." The woman bowed her head slightly, a gesture of acceptance. "It is okay. Many people do." The coach looked at his students. They were still watching, waiting for the explosion, waiting for him to yell at them to get back to work. But he didn't yell. He felt tired. He felt like the air had been let out of his balloon. "All right, break is over," he shouted, but there was no real anger in his voice. He sounded tired. "Back to work? Everyone find a partner. Let's go." The students hesitated for a split second, then slowly began to move. But the energy was different. As they paired up, nobody was fighting for dominance. Nobody was slamming their shoulders into each other. They were moving carefully, paying attention to their hips, paying attention to their balance. They had all just seen a masterclass in efficiency, and it had changed the way they thought about fighting. The coach walked over to the edge of the mat and sat down on a stack of crash pads. He watched the woman as she began to stretch by the wall. She moved with that same fluid grace, touching her toes, rotating her neck. She didn't look like she belonged in a rough gym. She looked like she belonged in a museum. He couldn't get the match out of his head. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her hand on his hip, the way she had redirected his energy. It wasn't magic, it was physics. But it was physics applied at a level he had never seen in person. He realized with a sinking feeling that he wasn't the king of the gym anymore. Not really. The true master was the quiet woman stretching in the corner. He stood up and walked over to the water cooler. He filled a paper cup and drank it in one gulp, the cold water shocking his system. He looked at his reflection in the mirror on the wall. He looked red, messy, and old. He turned back to look at the woman. She was now talking to the young man she had rolled with earlier. The kid was nodding enthusiastically, asking her questions. She was demonstrating a grip with her hand, explaining slowly. The coach watched her hands. They were small, but they moved with absolute precision. "Who are you?" he whispered to himself. He walked back onto the mat. He needed to know. He couldn't just let it go. He needed to know if she was some kind of professional fighter, or maybe a secret agent, or something else entirely. He approached her cautiously this time. The young man saw him coming and scurried away, eager not to get in the middle of it again. "Hey," the coach said, shoving his hands into his shorts pockets. He felt awkward. He never approached students after class. He usually just yelled at them and left. The woman looked up. "Yes, I have to ask," the coach said. "That stuff you were doing? That wasn't sport jiu-jitsu." "I mean, it was, but it was different. It was like high level." "Are you a competitor? Do you fight in the tournaments?" The woman tilted her head to the side. "I compete. Sometimes. Do you win?" he asked. He tried to make it sound like a joke, but it wasn't. "I do okay," she said. A tiny, almost invisible smile touched the corner of her mouth. It wasn't an arrogant smile. It was a secret smile. The coach laughed nervously. "You do okay? Lady, you just choked me out in 30 seconds and I outweigh you by 100 pounds. I've been training for 20 years. You don't do okay with skills like that. You're a shark." He pulled his phone out of his pocket. "Look, I don't mean to be rude, but I need to know. Who are you? What's your name? Have I seen you on the internet? Show me. Show me who you are." He held out his phone, expecting her to type her name into Google or show him an Instagram profile. But instead, she reached into her gym bag, which was sitting on the bench nearby. She unzipped a small side pocket and pulled out a thick leather wallet. She opened it and slid out a laminated card. It wasn't a business card. It was an ID card for a major sports federation. Then she reached deeper and pulled out a small velvet pouch. She loosened the drawstring and tilted it over her hand. Out slid a medal. It was heavy, gold, and tarnished slightly with age. The ribbon attached to it was the national colors, red, white, and blue. The coach stared at it. He knew that ribbon. He knew that style of medal. He saw them on TV once a year. He started, but his voice trailed off. He couldn't finish the sentence. The implications were rushing through his brain like a freight train. If she had that medal, she wasn't just a blue belt or a purple belt passing through town. She wasn't just a hobbyist. She looked up at him, her eyes finally losing a bit of that cold distance and softening with genuine warmth. She handed the card to him. It read Black Belt 3rd Degree and listed her name as a certified instructor. "I told you," she said quietly. "I've trained for a long time." The coach looked at the ID, then at the medal, then back at her face. The world seemed to tilt sideways. The quiet woman, the one he had mocked, the one he had tried to bully out of the gym, was standing right in front of him, holding credentials that were higher than his own. He had just tried to teach a lesson to someone who could teach him. He felt small. He felt like a bully who had just picked a fight with a master swordsman, thinking she was holding a stick. He looked around the gym. He wanted to tell everyone. He wanted to shout, "Do you know who this is?" But he knew she wouldn't want that. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing up and down. He handed her back the card and the medal with trembling hands. The coach stammered. He stopped. He took a deep breath. "I have a lot to learn." It was the hardest thing he had ever said. But it was the first step toward becoming a real fighter instead of just a loud one. The woman took her things and placed them gently back into her bag. She looked at the coach, and for the first time she offered him a genuine nod of respect. Not because he was strong, and not because he was the boss, but because he was man enough to admit he was wrong. The coach stood there for a long moment, staring at his own hands. They felt heavy and clumsy, like tools he didn't know how to use anymore. The medal and the ID card were back in the woman's bag, but their image was burned into his brain. He felt like he had just been staring at the sun. He blinked, trying to clear the spots from his vision, trying to process the shift in the universe. "National champion," he whispered, testing the words. They felt foreign in his mouth. He had spent his life thinking that being a champion meant being the loudest in the room, the one who could bench press the most weight, the one who didn't tap out until his arm broke. But standing in front of him was a woman who had reached the highest level of the sport by being quiet, efficient, and technical. She had turned his strength into a weakness without even breaking a sweat. He looked at the class. The spell was broken. The students were moving again, but there was a new rhythm to their movements. They weren't slamming into each other. They were watching their balance. They were trying to copy the fluidity they had just witnessed. The big football player was moving slowly, concentrating on his footing, clearly replaying the woman's movements in his head. The coach realized that even though he had lost the match, he had won something else. His gym had been given a gift. A harsh, embarrassing gift, but a gift nonetheless. He cleared his throat, louder this time, finding his voice again. "Listen up," he called out. The students stopped and looked at him. They expected him to be angry. They expected him to make excuses for losing. But the coach didn't do any of that. He walked to the center of the mat, his shoulders sagging slightly, stripping away the false bravado he usually carried like a shield. "I want you all to look at her," he said, pointing to the woman, who was now sitting on the bench, untying her belt. "Most of you saw what happened out there. You saw me try to use muscle. You saw me try to use size. And you saw exactly where that got me." He paused, looking down at his feet. "I was arrogant. I thought I knew what toughness looked like. I thought it looked like me. I was wrong." The gym was silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. In all the years the coach had run the gym, he had never apologized. He had never admitted a mistake. The students were frozen, listening intently. "Toughness isn't about how loud you yell," the coach continued, looking up at the class. "It's about control. It's about being calm when things go wrong." She was calm. I was a mess. Today, she was the teacher, and I was the student. I hope you all were paying attention, because she just gave you a free lesson that would take most people years to learn. He walked over to the woman. She was just finishing packing her bag. She stood up as he approached, ready to leave. She had done what she came to do. She had trained. She had tested herself, and she was ready to go home. "Hey," the coach said, his voice much softer than it had been an hour ago. "You don't have to run off." The woman looked at him, surprised. "I have completed my training. I have work early tomorrow." I know, the coach said, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "But look, I run this place, and clearly, I have a lot to learn. And frankly, so does my team. We have good muscles here, but we don't have—" He gestured helplessly, trying to find the words. "We don't have that. That magic you do." He took a deep breath and made a decision. It was a risk. He was asking someone he had just insulted to help him. But he knew it was the right thing to do. "Would you teach us?" He asked. "I mean, not just come to class. I mean actually teach. I can pay you, of course. Whatever you want. But I need someone to show these guys and me that technique beats muscle every time. I need a reality check, and I think my gym does too." The woman looked at him. She studied his face, looking for any sign of a trick. She saw a humbled man. She saw someone whose ego had been crushed and was now trying to rebuild it into something better. She saw sincerity. "I am not a professional coach," she said cautiously. "I do not like to yell." The coach laughed, a genuine hearty laugh. "That's exactly why we need you. I do enough yelling for 10 people. We need someone who knows what they're doing. Please, just come by once a week. A seminar. Or just roll with us. Anything." The woman thought about it for a moment. She looked at the students, who were all watching with hopeful expressions. Even the big football player looked like he wanted to learn from her. She saw a group of people who were hungry for knowledge, people who had been stuck in the same mindset for too long. She saw an opportunity to share the art she loved. "Okay," she said finally. "I can come on Thursdays," the coach smiled, a wide, relieved smile. "Thursday's perfect. I'll clear the schedule. You have the mats." They shook hands. His grip was loose and respectful this time, not crushing or dominating. It was the handshake of equals. "Thank you," the coach said. "Really?" The woman nodded, slung her gym bag over her shoulder, and walked toward the door. The students parted like the Red Sea to let her pass. A few of them nodded at her, murmuring quiet respects. She didn't say much, just a polite goodnight to the room. Then she was gone. The coach stood in the center of the empty circle left behind. He looked at the door as it swung shut. The air in the gym felt different. It felt lighter. The toxic, heavy energy that usually hung over the advanced class had evaporated. He looked at his students. "All right," he said, clapping his hands together. "You heard her. Thursdays are going to be different. But for now, let's get back to work. And for the love of everything holy, stop trying to kill each other with strength. Use your hips. If I see one more person trying to bench press their opponent, you're doing push-ups until your arms fall off." The class laughed. It was a real laugh, not the nervous chuckle of before. The coach laughed too. The rest of the session went smoothly. The coach walked around the mats, correcting postures, but he wasn't screaming. He was explaining. He was trying to be precise, trying to copy the calmness he had witnessed. He realized that he wasn't just a gym owner anymore. He was a student again, and that felt good. Later that night, after the last student had showered and left, the coach locked the front door and turned off the main lights. The gym was dark, lit only by the streetlights outside. He walked over to the heavy bags and leaned against one. He pulled out his phone. He opened the browser and typed in her name, the one he had seen on the ID. He hit search. The screen filled with images. There she was, standing on podiums with huge gold medals around her neck. There were headlines: "Dominates Division, Unstoppable Force, * Technical Masterclass." He scrolled through the articles. She was a legend in the competitive circuit. People traveled from other countries to learn from her. He saw a video of one of her matches. She was facing a woman twice her size, just like in his gym. The coach watched the video, mesmerized. He saw the same sweep, the same choke. It was beautiful. It wasn't violence. It was art. He watched it 3 times, trying to understand the physics of it. He put the phone back in his pocket. He felt a strange mix of shame and excitement. Shame for how he had treated her, for assuming she was weak, because she was quiet and small. But excitement for what was to come. Next Thursday, she would be back. He would be on the mat. And he would be the one asking questions. He realized that life had a funny way of humbling you when you needed it most. He had gotten too big for his britches. He had thought he was the king of the jungle. But the jungle had rules. Strength was only one part of it. The coach turned off the final light and walked out the back door into the cool night air. He took a deep breath. His ribs were sore from being thrown, his neck was tender from the choke, and his ego was bruised. But as he walked to his car, he felt lighter than he had in years. He knew that tomorrow, the sun would rise and the gym would open. But things were going to be different. He was going to be different. He was going to learn to listen, to watch, and to respect the quiet power of others. And he owed it all to a woman who walked in, said nothing, and showed him exactly what he didn't know. As he drove home, he didn't play his usual loud, angry rock music. He drove in silence, thinking about angles, leverage, and the journey of a true martial artist. He wasn't just the coach anymore. He was a beginner again. And for the first time in a long time, that was exactly where he wanted to be.